I know sometimes we skip the intro, we get straight into it, but actually, I think the intro is really useful context before we get into this conversation. So I'd love for you to tell people a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I'm Liv Sibony and I'm the co-founder of Impact Amplified. Quick potted history is I have quite a significant HR background in corporates as well as government and small businesses. And then I moved into the impact startup world and have been in the sort of innovation and impact and sustainability world for the past decade. What I currently do is I run Impact Amplified, and what we do there is we run training and capacity building consultancy, where the mission is really to empower everyone within the context of their business to be drivers for change. So how can we each contribute to making our organizations thrive by using a sustainability lens into the work that we do?
I love that you mentioned empowering the individual there, because actually, I think that's what's missing sometimes, and it's what we're really going to get into throughout the course of this conversation, I guess. First, I want to set a little bit of context, though. I feel like we've gone from anecdotal to actual data now on people wanting more purpose. And there was a report published by McLean and Co. a couple of weeks ago that showed 71% of job seekers want to work for environmentally friendly employers, and the same percentage, 71% of 18 to 29-year-olds, are willing to leave their organization for another that creates more social impact. So, why do you think this shift is happening towards a real sticking point for applicants being wanting to work somewhere more sustainable or more socially driven?
I think in reality, the challenges of the context of our world have always been there. There's been very long time since we've known the environment, the extent of the environmental damages and risks. And of course, socially, it always feels like there's some big social disruption. The difference is that there's access to mass media now, and we all have access to this information in a way that wasn't available before. And so there is now no looking away. And therefore, I think it feels a lot heavier for the new generation, whereby that seems like an inescapable reality everywhere we look. And so I think that's really what has accelerated this sense of need to really shift how we work. And I think one other element is the fact that, very importantly, our world, our business world, was built on a premise that resources were infinite and unlimited, and that we could just continue to take from the earth, and there was no consequences as to what was going to happen to materials at the end of their life. That was kind of true in Victorian times in the context of that world. But business as usual is no longer able to operate with that premise, because we now know that resources are limited and waste to that extent is no longer possible. So quite simply, business as usual needs to change in the updated context of the world that we're operating in. And I think, again, that's another really strong reason for which people feel the need to shift the way that they enter into business.
Yeah. The mass media point is interesting as well, because I think now people have such visibility into what happens behind a company. Like, if you think about it, probably I didn't know what Glassdoor was like 10 years ago, but now you can go and get those insights actually into the things that matter to me with an employer. Are they actually delivering on those promises? Because now we have reviews from people inside the company, for example, or there's real proliferation of job boards or job markets. It's much easier now to go in and really dig into so many different job descriptions for similar roles. And then you really get into the idea of, is this job description ticking the boxes that I want it to? So I think there's all these other things that are happening that mean buying power, if you wish, has kind of shifted to the applicant. And now we have much more visibility. They can't kind of hide behind stuff, can they?
That's so true. And to build on that, there isn't really, we now look at portfolio careers rather than one job for life. So we can afford to look around and switch if we're not happy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think I don't have the stats to it, but it feels like tenure at companies is decreasing, and therefore the stigma around you haven't stayed in this company that long. And especially if you can back that up by saying, the reason I'm applying is I'm passionate about the purpose of this company. I'm just not passionate about the purpose of the company I'm in right now. In fact, actually, there was this stat, I think it was around 13% of employees actively oppose the goals of their employer right now. So if you think about the friction between people who just genuinely oppose what their company currently does versus I want to work somewhere that does the thing I care about, I think there's a real shift there as well.
Absolutely.
Nice. I wanted to move on to something really interesting I'd never thought of before until we had our sort of first intro call. And it's the fact that organizations often make these decisions that feel like an obvious win or a quick win about how they can be more sustainable. But actually, a lot of the time, these are the wrong decisions or the suboptimal way to solve the problem. So tell us a bit about that. If you've got an example of kind of how and why this happens, that would be great.
Absolutely. So I would say, in an absolute way, quick win decisions are not necessarily bad. It's actually the context in which we look at them. And context being the really key word here, which is the fact that I think it's really helpful and important to be able to make quick win decisions, but you first need to be able to take a step back and understand the context in which we operate in and the ecosystem in that we form a part of, and then make an informed decision based on where we sit in that context and the bigger picture. And then you can certainly look to make a quick decision, because there is something really psychologically appealing about being able to do something and move forward, but it can't be taken in isolation and just looked at in a really sort of incremental way in terms of going, oh, there's a problem here, let me look at the solution. That is quite a reductive, incremental way of looking, which is very likely to create a sticky plaster solution. And when I was mentioning earlier the fact that, business as usual is no longer fit for purpose, and the knowledge that our resources are not infinite and we can't just keep throwing stuff away and adding more pollution, we therefore have to think about the whole system in a different way and where we fit into that. I mean, a perfect example of that at a really, really simple level is if I were to run a coffee shop and I decided that I'm going to replace my coffee cups with so-called biodegradable coffee cups. That is a well-meaning decision that in my mind is a sticky plaster solution that is inadvertently extending the status quo, because what you're doing is you're actually incentivizing this throwaway behavior by using a word like biodegradable to make people think that it's fine. Oh, it's biodegradable. I can just probably chuck it in nature, or at best sort of chuck it in the wrong bin because we don't usually have the right bins for it. Actually, you're still contributing to stuff being taken out of the ground. Even if it's recycled, you're actually still using a lot of energy to bring that back to that original state, a lot of bleach, a lot of chemicals, etc. And then you're going to throw it away at the end of its life, let alone finding the right place to dispose of it. If you actually think that we just need to use a lot less resources, we'd still love a delicious cup of coffee. Actually, you might think that the value you're offering is the best possible cup of coffee, and you might actually incentivize people to just simply sit down and have a coffee and really enjoy that for its moment. Or if you really have to take it away, it gives someone a discount for using a reusable coffee cup.
Yeah.
Or find a way that maybe I've seen sort of rent a cup coffee scheme, so you could potentially pay a deposit on the cup and then bring it back later and then get your money back.
Yeah.
So that makes a really big difference, because you've suddenly given, as a cafe, you're delivering delicious coffee, but you're not contributing to more materials, more chemicals being put into the world, nor more waste being put out at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, if we think about through the audience, the sort of perspective of being an L&D team or a people team or HR team, that is where you can make tangible impact by zooming out to the context level. Like you say, the core problem is that we want to have less waste. It's not that the cups are the problem, it's the core problem is to have less waste, isn't it? So then you can start saying, well, how do we enable our marketing team to create good materials around advertising the incentive to bring your own cup? How do we encourage people and enable them in the shops to say, to have the right conversation that reminds people and says, like, if you came in with your own cup, you could save X, Y, and Z money and you'd make this positive impact. So I really do like that example. It feels like the right amount of zooming out to the context, because you can see the core problem now. And I think actually, like you made the point earlier, they're like sticking plaster solutions. If we just instantly react to something and make 10 snap decisions on how this might change the way we operate as a business, then actually we might compounding effect is 10 suboptimal decisions that ultimately end in the worst outcome, I guess.
That's absolutely right. I mean, I now can't help but add another example of that, which is when, everyone's hero, David Attenborough, a while back talked about how bad plastic was. We all suddenly went up in arms about plastic and banned plastic straws. And then we thought, oh, great, now we all have metal straws, about 10 of them, and we've solved the plastic solution. That was a perfect example of actually, it's not his fault, it's our interpretation of it, which made the problem worse, which is the fact that plastic straws are about 0.0001% of the plastic problem. And buying a whole bunch of metal straws is just essentially, creating another problem, because to produce those metal straws is a lot more energy intensive. So we really just need to take a step back and think, where is the problem, which is usually not actually the really obvious one. It could still be a quick win, but it might not be that surface level problem solution framing.
Yeah. You mentioned labels earlier as well. Actually, this is an interesting point, and maybe it's just my marketing brain that's considering this, but the fact if we call something biodegradable as a shortcut to, oh, it's solving a problem, actually we can probably be a bit more intentional about the language you use within our business, in our outward facing communications, because I always see things like sustainably sourced, but with no insight or backing up of that claim. That's enough for most people to think that they're doing the right thing. So as businesses, actually, do you often see them needing to maybe make a shift around language?
I love that you say that. And actually, in the training and the consultancy that we do, that is one of the key takeaways, which is the fact that while we deliver training linked to sustainability, we ourselves are not scientists. And you would need many multiple lifetimes to really understand all of the science. And the science is constantly shifting. So don't worry about knowing everything. Instead, if there's one thing you can do, learn to apply a critical mind to what is out there and learn to ask some questions that go one or two steps below the surface to really get under the skin of that. And I think that's such a really wonderful gift of the L&D team, which is really, that is one of the things that we can offer to our employees. It's really, how do you apply that critical mind that enables you to be curious and really look at things in a way that is going to add value and not just be blind to the problem because you've just gone a little bit, autopilot in terms of just believing the words out there that aren't actually really meaningful.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that and that critical mind, because I think this leads us nicely into the next question. And I guess the commonality I saw between the first two questions there is that employees don't really want lip service, they want something tangible, and organizations shouldn't do things that are more or less kind of meaningless gestures. And potentially controversially, this leads us to corporate social responsibility days, volunteering days, the time that takes everyone out of the office to do what is perceived as something good. But actually, in some ways, does that fall into that meaningless gesture category?
So it's a very good question. What I would do, if that's okay, is first take a step back, which is, in order to answer that question, I think one of the first things we need to do is make sure that rather than looking at that problem solution lens that we discussed is not the most helpful, the first thing we need to do is take that step back, look at the bigger context, and not only understand where business as usual is no longer fit for purpose, but actually take ourselves out of our everyday reality, our everyday context, and really take time to imagine what, in the context of our system, whatever company we operate in, whatever our organization does, what is an ideal future that we are looking forward to as our guiding star? Think about something 10 years ahead. Think about, the fact that anything is possible in this world. If you work in healthcare, what does your perfect ideal healthcare solution look like in 10 years time, without worrying about how we're going to get there? And what's really important there is that really helps us set a guiding star for the direction of travel that we're looking in. So that when we start thinking about the solutions that we want to apply, those solutions end up being transformative solutions that are taking us that next level rather than the incremental thinking. And the reason I want to mention that is firstly because that helps us look at, the reusable cup rather than the disposable cup, but also because it helps answer this question about CSR and lip service, which is where do we really, really want to make an impact as an organization? And what is the purpose of a community scheme, a CSR scheme, etc.? It's really, ideally, we would like our organizations to have a genuine, long-lasting impact on the world. And then this comes back to the earlier point of going, that could be really quick fix ideas, but as long as those ideas are aligned to that bigger vision that we are working towards. And then in that case, you can go, okay, well, let's have a day where all of our employees get involved in the community. But actually, how is it linked to the greater vision of the world that we are working towards? And suddenly that day, I remember when I was working in a huge financial services organization, which will, well, you can find on my LinkedIn, but I won't mention it here. We can go a step further in finding out. And we used to have CSR days, and we used to go, we're a big bank, and we used to go and paint community walls. Now, if you saw my painting skills, poor people, I mean, they would have had to actually get it repainted. So not only did they waste time and money on getting someone like me to paint it, but actually I had really, deep HR skills that I could have applied to the community. And I would have felt a lot better equipped, a lot better for myself to have used these skills for the better good, and the community would have benefited a lot more. So as a starting point, use those skills in the community because the employees will feel more purposeful and the community will benefit a lot more. But could you go a level deeper and actually see how you can embed it into the core purpose and value of each employee so that we're not actually just having this one size fits all, we're all going to go on a painting day, but actually if you work in HR, how can you go and help someone in the community with that? If you work in procurement, how can you speak to your supply chain? If you, if you're in marketing, how could you help someone with a big marketing campaign? So actually, it's not one organization delivering everything. It's actually how can each employee feel more purposeful in their work. So I think again, a CSR policy, a CSR activity per se doesn't have to be bad, but really think meaningfully, where are you adding value? And ultimately, if you could go a step further in, rather than giving that one day of the year, by all means, give that one day of the year to your employees. But really the step further you could do is give space to each of your employees to think, how can they embed that additional bit of value, social and environmental, ideally aligned to each other, through the lens of your work, so that every single one of your activities on a daily basis is adding that value. Now, not only are you enabling your employees to be more purposeful, you're also delivering much better value to the whole world around you, all of your stakeholders, whether it's your direct community, your customers, your suppliers, your shareholders, nature. As we know, there's a lot of talk nowadays around nature being one of our stakeholders as well. But you are also therefore putting your entire organization in a much better position to adapt and to thrive in a world where the circumstances are changing. And to come back to my earlier point, where we have to change the status quo of what business as usual looks like. So it becomes this sort of much more wholesome, holistic step that makes your employees feel more purposeful in service of the people, planet, and your business itself.
Yeah, I really love that reframing because I think it's understandable why people lean that way because it's very easy to organize. If we get everyone together at one point, everyone has done something on the surface level, and it really wasn't that difficult to organize. But like you said, if I'm glad I've got the camera zoomed in because I've got some really bad painting just out of shot. But yeah, painting isn't my skill set. So if I go somewhere and paint something, that's not great. And therefore I don't feel like I've used my skill set, and therefore I don't necessarily even feel that sense of purpose. That was the very thing we started off this conversation with. But to your point, actually, in one of the companies I worked in, our marketing team got the opportunity to work with a local school, I think it was, and it was kids that were doing business studies, and they had to build out a project, and part of the project was to create a marketing campaign for it. So they went to different local businesses to kind of tick off these different parts of the project, and they came to ours to do marketing, and me and one other person from our team talked them through messaging, a marketing campaign, helped them shape that part of their project. And that was a much more useful um, use of our time. It meant our skill set was actually used. We made a difference to someone. And the nice thing about that, because it was on a more personal level, was at the end, they invited everyone who contributed to come and watch them present it to people. So it's just like a much more gratifying and rewarding experience. And it genuinely made more of a difference to people than if I'd badly painted a wall like I have behind me just now.
Absolutely. That's really wonderful. I'm
Yeah.
happy you got that opportunity to experience it.
No, it was great. I want to spend a little bit of kind of the rest of the conversation really diving into just a few of your most practical and useful ways that, like we said earlier, people, teams, or HR and L&D can be more sustainable, but also empower people to become more sustainable, to your point of the small actions that are happening as part of the usual business that kind of build up over time. So, yeah, what would one of those be, those really practical pieces of advice?
Yeah, of course. So it's been really interesting in the training and consulting that we've done to really listen to what we do is we really give people their understanding of the bigger context in which they operate in, and then we take people through a journey and give them tools to be able to think about what is most impactful to them, so that we never tell people what they should be doing, but people realize what comes out for them. So based on that experience, there's been some really wonderful actions that people have taken that they've shared with us. So if I think specifically about people in HR, there was one person who looked at their onboarding process. And what they did in the onboarding process is actually include in the training materials the need to go through the basics of climate science, the 101, linked to the system that they were operating in, and then get everyone to commit to one or to imagine one action that they would be taking in the context of their new role. And what was helpful there is not only are you then hitting all new employees, you are exciting them about their new roles. You're really making them feel much more purposeful in that role. And you also, what they said is they really benefited from this fresh thinking, because as a result of the new employees coming in, they had a perspective of the outside world that really brought new, fresh ideas that were then brought into the rest of the organization. So that was a really interesting, wonderful experience that someone shared of the action that they took. There was another person we worked with who worked in the L&D space. And what I really enjoyed hearing there is that L&D really nowadays is about continuous learning, and that sense of just always needing to just little bit, incrementally add to our learning. Now, if we look at sustainability, there's a real incredible parallel there, which is the fact that there's no right or wrong in sustainability, and there's no end result. The whole point of sustainability is that it is a constant journey that needs constantly adapting. If you think of the analogy of a sailing ship, that really is how we need to look at sustainability. That's how we need to look at organizations in the future. We're no longer a train on a single rail track that is going one direction. We're a sailing ship in a much bigger context, and we need to keep adapting according to the environment around us. And really, so someone in the L&D space enabled people to embed sustainability as a continuous element of their learning journey, where they would learn something, apply it, and then check it again and then adapt it along the
Mm,
way. And that's really important. Your point earlier on branding that says this is sustainable. By definition, anyone who says that what they do is sustainable, they are lying. Nothing is sustainable.
mm.
Everyone is ideally, at best, on the pathway towards more sustainability. And that is the only thing we can ever do, is be on that pathway. So it's really a wonderful parallel between continuous learning in L&D and continuous improvement and sustainability. And they really embedded those two elements beautifully into their work. And then I would say a third HR example that really stood out was someone who essentially embedded a KPI into people's performance review that had a social or environmental action. So they incentivized everyone across the organization to benefit from taking social or environmental, ideally social and environmental action combined into their work, because that was embedded into their performance reviews. One thing I would like to add is that, very importantly, they made sure that it was meaningful to each employee. So each employee was given the tools to be able to dig a little bit deeper, learn a bit more about it, so that they could come up with what was most relevant to them. Because I'll give you an example. If you work in an organization that is based on logistics and transport, and the biggest bulk of your environmental impact is transport, and therefore you need to switch to an electric vehicle fleet, that's great. But unless you're the people linked to the fleet, that is completely meaningless to all of the other people in the organization. So you can't have this one big environmental goal for the organization that will necessarily apply to all of your employees. Whereas if you go one level deeper and enable each employee to say what that means to them, they're actually much more incentivized to do something that is really meaningful and will continue to accelerate the overall sustainability of the organization.
Yeah. I love all of them, and it won't surprise you to know I've got some follow-up questions about
Great.
each of them. But I guess that last point, is that a way we can approach this actually that gets more buy-in and gets more people engaged as bottom up? Because a lot of the time when you hear it, it's kind of like, it sounds like it's coming top down. A company decides X, Y, and Z, communicates it to people internally, and then it's this friction between the person trying to work out what they do to fit into that. And like you say, this is often where that just doesn't feel like it relates to me. But actually, is it easier to start bottom up and try and sit down with people and really have an honest conversation about where does your role overlap with these goals to be more socially conscious or environmentally conscious? And then how do we then shape that into an action plan for you to go away and do it, rather than saying, here's a goal, make it work, there you go.
Well, I think you framed your question in a really beautiful way, which is the fact that I think it's inevitable that we need direction from the top in order to commit to this change. But the way you framed the question, to me, actually was the answer as well, which is the fact that I think it needs to be delivered from the bottom up, but at a strategic level, there definitely needs to be some commitment, some buy-in, and then empower all of your employees to go, okay, this is the direction we believe we're going in. This is our guiding star. How do you think you can contribute to this? Now, of course, you might have flexibility and being open to being challenged if you don't know that this is definitely the right direction. My sense is that as a leader, you probably should be confident in the overall longer term direction that you're bringing the company in, but then the actual change to make it happen is going to be much more effective if people are empowered from the bottom up to really make that work, because it means something different to everyone in the context of their role. If you're in procurement, what you could do is you could look at your entire supply chain and you could have a policy that incentivizes, that rewards people who have better social and environmental credentials. Or again, if you're in procurement, you could actually have an open training day to teach everyone in your supply chain how to go about doing that change. That second point is so important, because there's something called the just transition. And the just transition, as people teams here listening to this, HR, etc., we all want to bring people with us on the journey. We don't want to just penalize people for not having done it yet. So how do we bring people on that journey with us so that we leave no one behind? So you're much more inclusive in giving your your supply chain the opportunity to learn and adapt rather than punishing them and going, you're not sustainable, we're going to switch suppliers to someone who's more sustainable.
Mm.
But if you're the office manager might then go, oh, actually, I'm always going to serve vegan food at all of our events. And not only am I going to serve vegan food, I'm going to put little post-it notes explaining, little cards explaining why we're serving vegan food. We're serving vegan food because this is the impact of meat. And suddenly, not only have you just reduced the impact of farming with that one meal, but importantly, you've amplified that impact by as many people as have come onto it and created something interesting as a story, as a talking point, and hopefully inspiration to get other people to take action. So those individual actions wouldn't have come from the top, but they might all still be moving in that bigger strategic direction.
Yeah. No, I really like that. Funny enough, we talked about top and bottom. I do want to also mention the middle. Something that's come up in a lot of conversations recently is people managers or people leaders, and how much of it comes down to enabling them, because they need to be able to have those conversations with their direct employees. They need to be able to manage the bottom up stuff to the top to communicate that messaging. So when you're working with companies, is it often that you're enabling managers? Are you working with the individual employees? And yeah, how does that work?
So we absolutely, and I think you're absolutely right. It needs to come from every direction. One of the things we do, depending on the size of the organization, is if they're, more than say 50 people in an organization, we do the sort of train the trainer model, because actually it is much better, this training coming from within. Now, interestingly, that hat doesn't have to be a manager hat necessarily. In my mind, that is a quality of leadership that someone needs to display. And that leadership quality could come from someone at any level. It's about the qualities that they're displaying rather than the actual name. But again, it's sort of coming back from that question of buy-in. The more senior and then middle management buy-in you have, the more effective it will be at being embedded. But the delivery of it, I think, needs to come from anyone who has an ability to display leadership skills to bring everyone else on board with them.
Yeah. Yeah, those internal influencers, that's who you're looking for, the ones who can captivate people or encourage them. I did want to ask you as well, that second tip around continuous learning and that overlap between actually the core traits of L&D or the core mission of L&D and to be more sustainably focused. Is it kind of because the same thing is happening, right? That the world is changing so fast on both counts that things like resilience, change management, creativity, curiosity that we have to foster for people to learn effectively are also the same traits people need to think critically about the day-to-day sustainability. Is that fair?
That's very, I'd never thought of it exactly in those terms, but that's absolutely correct, I would say. Change management is really important because the point about sustainability is we are looking at change and how we drive change forward. We need creativity. So coming back to my earlier point about imagining the future that we can work towards, that sense, that need for imagination obviously then comes hand in hand with creativity. I think it's really important to really understand, to, really building on your question, that the circumstances of the world are constantly changing. So we can't have a static L&D function. We can't have a static sustainability delivery strategy because, we could have never predicted COVID. COVID meant that we looked at mental health in a different way. COVID meant that we looked at employee welfare in a different way. COVID meant that we looked at applications of technology in a different way. We could have never predicted any of that. My belief is that one of the next big problems to come into play will be water. But I think that the only way that water will be propelled to an equal high list on the agenda is when we have some huge water, I think it's enough to know that we're all drinking microplastics and that our sewage is overflowing into our rivers. doesn't seem to be a big enough problem, but that what something bigger will happen and it will trigger that. And in a way, you just need to understand that the next big drama will create the need for us to adapt. So we just need to be prepared to constantly adapt to whatever next big thing happens.
Yeah.
So it's really we just need to be nimble and prepared, and we can sit in fear and worry about anything that's happened, or we can really lean into it and go, how can I apply my critical mind and creativity to really see how we can create an opportunity to deliver something much better? I mean, there's so much innovation that we can do in terms of better water systems. There's so much innovation we can have around how to learn together, how to, share better, how to live better in community, how to better be able to, live in a neighborhood that is better connected. So there's wonderful, wonderful opportunity to create a much better world as a result of this. And we can really lean into that. So with constant learning and curiosity through L&D, we can really be proper champions for sustainability.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. You made me think again, you mentioned that imagination exercise. Is that something you go through with companies to try and get them to
Yes.
sit down and really think about that? And, any advice on doing that so people can think a bit broader about this idyllic future or where they want to get to as a company, I guess?
Absolutely. So it's my favorite part of the delivery that we do, because you take people from that space of actual sort of discomfort around all of the reasons why business as usual is no longer fit for purpose. And then firstly, I think it's really important to take someone out of their everyday space so that you just are in a different context. That means that you might be able to see things in a different way. In nature, even better, but wherever it can be that is just different to your usual working space, great. Even if it's, another room, just some change. And actually, I'm happy to share some exercises. There's one by the wonderful systems thinker Donella Meadows, and if you look up envisioning exercise by her, there's a really wonderful one. But essentially, you just get everyone to close their eyes and you get them to imagine. It's really important to think about it in the context of the system in which you operate. So again, whether you operate in healthcare or transport or insurance, it doesn't matter what system you're operating in, but use that system, and you take people through a visioning exercise where they're imagining the bigger world that they live in. Help them imagine the community they live in, help them imagine where the food comes from, help them imagine what the neighborhood is like. And so you ask them a number of different probing questions that help them visualize or feel or tap into any of the senses that most resonate with them on all of the sort of context of that system, so that they can really embody those feelings and that vision of theirs. So you ask the questions and then they can imagine what that is like for them. And you can do it, you could do quick fire 5 minutes, but ideally if you've got 20 to 30 minutes to do it, that makes a really big difference. And it's quite extraordinary where if someone closes their eyes and is taken into this space of imagining all of the different elements of that system, how they come out feeling completely different, and you feel positive, you feel optimistic, but you've actually got some really tangible thoughts on things that have come up that excite you to work towards. Importantly, we also really love then bringing that into a peer-to-peer exercise where people then share, firstly in small groups. It's quite an emotional journey. So helping share with one other person first so that they can make sense of those thoughts, build on it with someone else, and then come back to the bigger room to be able to share with everyone, really helps people connect with it, share with another person, have space to think about it, build a little bit further, and then share with a wider group. And then you realize that you've collectively built this vision that you're all excited to work towards.
I can really see how that works because most people, even if the processes aren't bad, are quite jaded by processes in their businesses because there's a sense that they could work better. And I don't know if you saw that Gallup State of Workplace report, but there's this really big correlation between how bad processes are at a company and how high stress and unhappiness are. So I think actually it'd be a useful exercise for everyone, regardless, to pull people out of the day to day, the hamster wheel, which is my favorite saying, and then just think about what a better process or future might look like. And then people, like you said, they come away with more of a sense of, well, in an ideal world, it were like this, and how can we work towards that more? And probably a bit more hopeful than the sort of jaded sense that I often get with people about how they work.
I think hope is really, you mentioned a more hopeful future, and that's it. That's really what drives me and makes me so excited about this space, which is that visioning exercise is key to helping all of us feel really excited about something that we can build towards that feels real and meaningful and achievable. I think when we are stuck in our hamster wheel and we look at the news and we look around us and we look at our echo chambers of social media, everything feels so heavy, and anything linked to sustainability feels like a sacrifice. It feels like we need to do less of this, and it's going to cost us this, and we're going to lose this, and we're going to do that. How about working towards a future that feels exciting? And actually, if we understand the values that are important to us and actually move towards more of an economy of creativity, an economy of purpose, actually, not only are there no sacrifices, but it's actually really additive. And you look at growth as something that is from an emotional, intellectual, learning, creativity, development perspective. And we can continue to have growth. We're just not doing it at the detriment of all of the natural resources, which are limited. Growth is just takes on a whole new meaning. So I think this sense of hope is really the key to it all.
That's brilliant. I'm always keen to end on a positive note, so that's great because we're going to tick that box. Liv, I'll put the links to connect with you to learn more about Impact Amplified in the description. And if there is an exercise, a link to that exercise, if you send that to me, I'll pop that in there as well. And then people can get in touch with you if they want to learn more. But I really enjoyed that conversation. Hopefully, we tick the box of getting those practical tips in there that people can take away and apply.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. And I do hope that people find inspiration for some of this that they can embed into their work and give their employees a sense of hope as well.
I hope so. Yeah, I'm sure they will. Thanks a lot, Liv.
Thank you.